Right? So I want to explain to you today my theory of what happened. All right. So the first thing you need to understand is this system collapsed even though it was traumatic for Europe. It is not unique in human history. This sort of stuff has happened before, okay? So if we go over here to North America, to the Mayas, okay, so the Maya civilization existed in Central America, okay, or Guatemala basically. And so we find a similar pattern where in about 200 AD, okay, in the year 200, their civilization started to explode, okay? It started to increase. It reached its peak at about 900 AD. Okay? In the year 900, its civilization was over the place in Central America. But then after 900, it went all the way down, okay? So about 30 years' time, by 1200, their entire civilization almost collapsed. So it's a very similar pattern to what's happening in the Bronze Age. So the question then is, why does this happen? All right? And so to understand this, I'm going to present you with a new theory that we will use a lot in this class. So I want you to understand this theory, okay? But it comes from a historian by the name of Peter Turchin. Peter Turchin, who's a historian. He's American, but he came over from Russia. He's basically Russian-American. And he has a theory called elite overproduction. And elite overproduction, the theory is very interesting because it's arguing against the way we traditionally understand why societies collapse, okay? So the way we usually understand why societies collapse is we get it from Karl Marx. And basically what Karl Marx says is eventually your society collapses because the people revolt, okay? So basically people rebellion. So in other words, Karl Marx believes that society collapses because it is a bottom-up process. Okay? It's a bottom-up process. If you treat workers badly, they will stop working. If you force them to work, they will go on strike. If you force them to work again, they will fight against you. They will rebel, okay? A worker revolution. Okay, that's what Karl Marx argues. And Peter Turchin says, okay, that's a really interesting theory, but if you look at the historical data, if you look at the evidence, the problem isn't the bottom, okay? If you look at why societies collapse, it's not because of the people rebelling, it's because there's infighting among the elite. Okay? So there's civil war among the elite. Does that make sense? That's his theory. If the problem with society isn't that there's too many poor people, the problem is there are too many rich people. That's the real problem. And that's why societies collapse. All right? All right. So let me explain to you this theory slowly, okay? We call elite overproduction. And this was proposed by a historian named Peter Turchin. And Peter Turchin spent decades looking at why societies rise and fall. He looked at the Roman Empire. He looked at the French Revolution. He looked at many different examples. And what he believed is societies fall, decline, collapse because of the idea of elite overproduction, meaning you have too many powerful people competing for limited positions of power. All right? So to understand this, I'm going to talk about another experiment called rat utopia. And rat utopia was a series of experiments conducted by an American scientist named James B. Calhoun. And what James Calhoun was trying to do in his experiments was trying to figure out what living in a world of abundance and wealth and security meant. After World War II, the world was divided between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was the Cold War. But it was also a time of increasing abundance due to technology and peace. And the population was increasing. So James Calhoun conducted these experiments to figure out what this meant for the world. So what he did was this. He had a room, okay, that was sealed off from the world. And in the room, he put in food and water and housing for a colony of rats. Maybe like 10 rats at first, but they quickly became 400, 500 rats. And at first, the rats were really happy. But no matter how Calhoun configured the experiment, ultimately, the rats always ended up killing each other. Okay? So what he discovered is, if you live in a world of abundance and security, the end result is the rats always kill each other. And he kept on doing this for 20 years. And he could never, ever create a situation in which the rats lived peacefully. And he could never figure out why this was the case. And even today, there's a huge debate as to why this is the case. But he had a theory, okay? And the theory is this. The rats were not competing for food. They were really competing for status. All right. So let's think of this, okay? In a state of nature, in the real world, rats compete each other for mating rights, right? So you see a beautiful rat, and you fight over her, right? The rat who wins out is now the alpha male. And the alpha male can have as many female companions as he wants. Okay? And what do the other rats do? In nature, what will the other rats do?
Fight against them.
Well, the other rats will probably run away, go somewhere else, and find other female companions, right? Because everyone's trying to be the alpha male. But what's the problem with James Calhoun's experiment? Why do they fight each other?
Because they can't be the alpha male.
There's no place for them to go. They're stuck where they are. You understand? So status is what we call a zero-sum game. I win, you lose. Okay? There can only be one winner. But in nature, if I win, then the other rats run away and try to build their own colony. But in James Calhoun's experiment, there's no place for them to go. And so all that happens is they keep on fighting each other until they die. Okay? And that's the idea of elite overproduction. And that's what Peter Turchin says. The elite, the children of the elite, are always fighting for positions of power. Not normal people, it's the children of the elite. But eventually, the elite have too many children, and there are not enough positions of power. Okay? Another way of saying this is that in China today, there are too many graduates of Peking University, Beida, and Tsinghua University, Tsinghua, right? They want to be the big boss. They want to have the power, but there's too many of them. Okay? There's no place for them to go. And that leads to conflict in society. And ultimately, what Peter Turchin has discovered is, if that's the case, then elite overproduction will ultimately lead to either war or revolution. It will lead to the collapse of society. And there's no way around this. Okay? That's Peter Turchin. In this world, about 1200 BCE, we have something called a permanent hereditary elite, okay? Permanent hereditary elite. Permanent just means they're always there, okay? Hereditary means they pass on their status and their privilege and their wealth to the children. And this is new in human history because before there was an elite, but they were not permanent, meaning they could be changed over time. And they didn't pass their privileges on to their children. Everyone had to earn their privilege and power. Okay? So the elite was constantly shifting in society. But now, in about the year 1200 BCE, you had a permanent hereditary elite. When you have that, you have three advantages. Okay? What the elite gives society are three major advantages. The first major advantage is the idea of organization. Right? Basically, think of the elite as your brain, as society's brain. They can help coordinate resources, okay? And that's good for war. If you're fighting an enemy, you need an elite to lead you into battle, okay? It's also good for public works. Okay, so think of the pyramids in Egypt and the Great Wall of China, right? You need an elite to organize your resources in order to create public works that benefit all society. So the main thing here would be irrigation, right? Okay? So you need an elite in order to have irrigation. So that's the first major benefit of having a permanent hereditary elite. Second major advantage is because you have better organization, you have more wealth. Okay? Society becomes wealthier if you have a permanent elite. People work harder. Okay? And even though there's more inequality, inequality also forces people to work harder. Does that make sense? Okay? And because you have these two things, organization and wealth, you also have scale. And what scale basically means is your population now can move up. Before, in the egalitarian society, when you didn't have a permanent elite, at most society could reach about 10,000 people. But now when you have a permanent elite, you can reach about 1 million people. Okay? So now you can scale up. So these are three major advantages to having an elite. Okay? But there's a problem with having an elite. And the problem is they engage in something called rent-seeking behavior. All right? I want you guys to remember this term, rent-seeking behavior, because it's very important for our class. So what does this mean? It means basically, so think of a landlord, right? A landlord doesn't really do anything, but a landlord has land that it can rent to you, the farmer. In exchange, you give me a share of your crops, right? So I don't do anything, but because I have land, I can rent it out to you, right? It turns out the elite mainly make their money through rent-seeking behavior. So let me give you another example of rent-seeking behavior. All of you want to go to university, right? Why do you want to go to university? What's your purpose? What's your purpose in going to university? Be honest. It's to get the degree, right? Okay? The degree. Okay? And the degree is your ticket to success in society, okay? You believe that when you go to university, you are getting a ticket, the degree, in order to access social mobility, okay? To access wealth in society. In other words, the universities are charging you rent, okay? So the degree is basically rent. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, some of you may say, wait, that's wrong because I'm going to university to learn, right? It's about learning. Well, guess what? When you actually go to university, you're going to discover they don't actually teach you that much, okay? They don't have to teach you that much. And the reason why is you're stuck paying the rent. You need the degree, right? So you don't have to actually teach you anything. You have to come to class anyway. Does that make sense? It's the same thing for the school, where in order to get to university, you have to go through this high school. So you're here paying tuition, and you're paying rent. Does that make sense? You're not here in the school to learn. You're here in school to get the degree so that you can access university and get that degree, okay? And all this process, all you're doing is paying rent. Right? So if you have a school, you can charge people rent. Just as if you're a landlord, you can charge people rent for renting your room or real estate property, okay? Does that make sense? This is what we call rent-seeking behavior. Now, you're like, okay, well, this kind of sucks, okay? And it does suck. But what keeps the system together is the idea of a social contract, okay? Basically, the idea of social contract is, yes, we the elite, we know we are charging you rent, and we know this sucks for you, the people, but we have a contract. So as the elite, I'm obligated to help society, okay? So the way they help society is by giving back to society, okay? So what the elite do throughout society in the past is they organize public feasts, okay? And also public temples. So in today's society, you know, like the parks, the schools, they're built by the government, right? But back then, they didn't have a government. They had the elites who were responsible for building temples, for building, for holding public feasts. Okay? So this is the idea of a social contract. Okay? And the reason why you need a social contract is because if you don't have a social contract and you just charge rent, people will leave. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So in this world, it's very chaotic, but there are different places, there are different social organizations you can go to. So if you are in Egypt and you don't really like Egypt, guess what? You can go to Mesopotamia. Okay? So these cities were in competition with each other for people because people provided labor and resources. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? So this is how it usually works. But over time, this system will break down. Okay? This system will break down. And it's because of rent-seeking behavior, okay? So the first issue is this. With rent-seeking behavior, you create something called debt. Okay? So I'm a landlord, and you are paying me rent in order to use my land, right? And that land and that rent is usually a portion of your crops, okay? So does that make sense? Maybe 10% of your crops. But let's just say, for example, it's a bad year. It doesn't rain, okay? And you don't have any crops to pay me rent. So what do? You're supposed to pay me a rent, but you don't have the money, so what do you do? No, that comes later. What do you do first? Exactly, thank you. Yes, okay. So the first thing that happens is borrowing, okay? You basically go into debt. So you promise to pay me double in the next year. And I'm like, okay, fine, right? But you get unlucky and the next year, it's also a bad year. And so for 5 years in a row, you are in debt. The problem with debt is this, something called compound interest, okay? Meaning like over time, the debt becomes so large, there's no way you can pay it off. If you can't pay it off, what happens now? Okay, good, yeah. So the idea is debt slavery, okay? So if you can't pay me back, you become my slave, okay? You promise me that your children will work for me for free, okay? And so debt slavery becomes the natural product of rent-seeking behavior. Does that make sense? Over time, you're always going to have a percentage of your population who go into debt slavery. And this creates a lot of instability in society because obviously they either want to run away or they want to rebel, okay? Does that make sense? The other problem is elite overproduction. And the idea here is everyone wants to be the renter, right? Everyone wants to be the landlord, right? But there's only so much land. So now people are competing for the power to charge rent. Does that make sense? Okay? So over time, in any society, as the population increases, the number of people who go into debt slavery increase, and therefore people at the bottom are very angry. But at the same time, the elite, the number go up, but there's only a set amount of land, and therefore they have to fight over the land. Okay? Does that make sense? And so eventually, what happens is the society goes into war. Okay, as the elite fight each other for the right to charge rent. Okay, does that make sense? And so the main message of elite overproduction is, unless you can control the number of the elite in your society must collapse. Does that make sense? It must collapse because you have too many people fighting for too little power. It must collapse. So historically, what are things you can do to control the elite? What are things you can do to control the number of the elite? Excuse me?
Stop the heritage.
Kill the elite?
No.
But then where does the property go? So one possible thing you can do is the idea of land redistribution. Okay? So historically, this is one mechanism you can use to control the growth of the elite. And this is how kings came into power. Okay? So most societies have an elite, and then one person from the elite said, listen, this society is not working, let me redistribute the land and cancel debt in order for our society to keep on going, okay? And this person became the king. So that's one possible solution, okay? What's another possible solution? Okay, so you can also have a civil war, okay? Civil war. Okay? The elite can fight amongst themselves, and whoever wins gets everything, okay? So that's the second possible solution. What's another possible solution? What's another possible solution? Okay, empire building, right? Does that make sense? Empire building. In other words, let's not fight amongst ourselves. Let's go and conquer new territory. It doesn't make sense. So because you have a permanent hereditary elite, okay, over time, they're going to reach a mass, too many people. When you have too many elite, you have to resolve this issue through three ways, okay? The first thing you can do is kill the elite and redistribute the land. That's what a king does. Second thing you can do is have a civil war, okay? The third thing you can do is create an empire, okay? But these three solutions by themselves are also unstable, okay? Because land redistribution is basically a revolution. Right? Civil war is war. Empire building is also war. Does that make sense? So no matter how you do these things, you're always going to create instability. And eventually, your empire, your society will collapse. Does that make sense? All right? So let me give you another example of how this works to clarify it for you, okay? So there's a book called Capital in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty. Thomas Piketty is a French economist. And this is a very famous book that's been recently published. And in the book, he looked at the past 100 years of economic growth. And what he discovered over time is the financial economy grows faster than the real economy. Capital grows faster than manufacturing. Okay? So if you look at capital, grows at 5%. Real economy grows at 2%. right? If things stay stable over time, this will happen to all societies. Capital will grow faster than the real economy. What this means is, let's just say you have $1 million, okay? I have $1 million. I have different options to invest my money. I can start a factory, or I can put all my money into real estate or the stock market. Where should I put my money? I can open a factory, right? Or I can put it in the stock market. Where should I put my money? Yes, and why? Exactly, do you understand? If you have money today, you do not put your money into the factories. You do not open a new business. You put it in the stock market because you make more money that way. What's the problem with that? Yeah, exactly. It's just a bubble, guys, okay? Why is it a bubble? Because money isn't real. Capital isn't real. It's a fiction. You understand? So in other words, you don't work anymore. You understand? You're just renting now, okay? You're engaging in the rent-seeking behavior. When you have too many people doing that, you have a society where nobody works. Does that make sense? Nobody does any work because all the wealth is being put into rent-seeking behavior. It's being put into speculation. So no one's doing any more work. No one's creating more wealth. And this eventually leads to social collapse at some point. Okay? Does that make sense? All right? So Peter Turchin's theory of elite overproduction is because the number of rich people can only go up over time, your society must collapse at some point. Unless you choose to have a revolution, or you have a civil war, or you go invade other countries, okay? Those are your three options. But if you did that, that creates more instability. So over time, no matter how you structure your society, it will collapse. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's what happened during the Bronze Age collapse, where these societies, Macedonian Greece, Hittites, Egypt, Canaan, they were fundamentally unstable because of rent-seeking behavior, okay? Same thing with the Mayans, where, okay, they were growing very fast, but eventually they collapsed. All societies will do this at some point. No society is stable, okay? And the reason why is you have an elite in charge who help society grow, but over time, they will just engage in rent-seeking behavior, which will eventually lead to collapse of society. Does that make sense? Right? And this is a pattern that we'll see over and over again in human history. And we will discuss this idea throughout this semester. All right? Does it make sense? Any questions? All right, so I warn you that this framework, there are a lot of problems with it, but it is a useful tool for us to analyze society in the past. Okay? All right, so I'm going to make generalizations about how society is structured. So at the core of society, the very powerful people, these are certain families. Okay? These are the founding families of this nation. And there's not that many of them, maybe 10, maybe 100, okay? But at most 100. So if you go back to the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire controlled most of Europe, as well as Anatolia, Egypt. It was a huge area, but really there were only about 200 families that controlled the Roman Empire, okay? All right, so how these families express power, how they control power in society is through three mechanisms, okay? Three pillars of power. And these three pillars are finance. Okay? Finance, we talked about last class, it's just central banking. All right? Second pillar is religion. Religion is just what people believe, how to control what people believe. Now, the religion of today is science and technology. Okay? And the third pillar is intelligence or spies. All right. Now, for the purpose to save time, I'm not going to go too deeply into intelligence and religion, but I will in future classes. Okay. I just need you to remember that there are three pillars of power at the core of society: finance, intelligence, and religion. And it's their nexus, their combination that allows the elite to control everyone else. Okay? So from this nexus, they will control all aspects of society, including schools, including the military, including government, including the media, including culture, including crime, the mafia. Okay? Every aspect of society that you can imagine is being controlled in some respect by this nexus of power. Okay? Also, you have like corporations, right? And then at the outer edge are the people. Okay? The people, because they're so massive, the massive people, they're the ones who generate wealth for society. So this system is designed to create as much energy as possible through the people. Okay? Energy. Because the harder the people work, the more wealth is generated in society. All right? So a metaphor that we can use is this. Think of society as a corporation. The people are the workers, right? They're the ones who do the real work. The elite, these families, are the owners. And these people in between, the middle class, are the managers. Okay? So again, this is a very simple metaphor, and it's not accurate, but it's useful for analysis. Okay? So the families are the owners of the corporation, the people are the workers, the people in between, the managers, are the managers. And we call these people the middle class. There have been other names for it in China before in history. We call them the scholar officials, right? Another name for them is something called the professional managerial class, PMC. Also, another name for them is the petty bourgeoisie. Okay? Again, you don't need to know these names. For the purpose of simplicity, we will just call them the middle class. All right. Does that make sense? Okay. So having gone through the structure of society, let's talk about what happens when society rises and falls. Okay? When it rises, the dynamic of these three groups, it's very interesting. When it rises, the families who own the nation are happy to let the managers control society. And this is what we call democracy, right? And the managers are always providing feedback to the families and saying, we should treat workers better. If we treat workers better, then they will work harder. Okay? And at this point, things are great. The people feel that they have a voice in the system, they're making good money, everyone's really happy. But what happens because of the elite overproduction is these families produce too many children who want positions of power. Basically, they want to spend money from the corporation. And now the corporation is in trouble. It's in debt. Okay? So at this point, what happens is this. You would think the managers would say to the families, listen guys, we need to be more fair to the people. But what really happens in reality is the managers exploit the people. Okay? The managers will now deceive. They will lie to the people. They will commit fraud. They will exploit the people. Why? The reason why is this. What the managers really do is something called rent-seeking behavior. Okay? Rent-seeking behavior just means they have a certain power that they want to exploit in order to extract wealth from other people. So for example, the most classic example is you own an apartment in Beijing, right? So you rent it out to someone who needs to live in Beijing and you collect rent. Well, this is true for a lot of people. So if you are a lawyer, you collect rent because only you can work in the court system. So if you want to sue someone, or if you have a contract dispute, you have to go to a lawyer, okay? The lawyer is collecting rent. And that's what the middle class, the professional managerial class do. They are rent seekers, okay? Another way of saying this is, guys, if you go to a company, you know what the workers do, right? You know what the managers do? They really don't do that much, okay? And this is true for the middle class. Like, the managers, the middle class, live very nice lives. And so when the company's in trouble, the managers are like, well, I have a very nice life, I have a very nice job, but I don't do anything, so I'll probably be the first to get fired. So they have to show their worth. They have to prove their worth, and therefore they exploit the workers. Okay? Do you understand? They push the workers harder to generate more wealth. All right? So in the decline phase, this is not really a problem. But what happens over time is the conflict within the elite gets worse and worse. Elite overproduction. And what will eventually happen is they will form into factions that compete against each other for power. Okay? And when that happens, then society becomes aligned into factions. The factions will bring in certain elements of the middle class, which will then bring in certain elements of the people. And now, what happened is civil war or revolution. And this marks the collapse of society. What's really important for us to remember is this is a natural cycle, and no amount of external threat will change that dynamic. Why? Because it's very common for these factions to align with mercenaries. Okay? So there's foreign invasions, not because some guy overseas is like, oh, this society is unstable, I'll come and invade. What happens often is a certain faction invites mercenaries into the nation as part of the power struggle. And then the mercenaries realize, you know what, we can stick this for ourselves. All right? So when you reach the collapse phase, the society is much too insular, much too wrapped with infighting to care about external threats. And that's why, if there's an alien invasion, it really wouldn't change anything. Okay? All right? Is this clear to you guys? Yes. So again, this is the model we're working with to explain the rise and fall of societies. At first, in this system, the elite families are willing to let the managerial class incentivize and motivate the workers to do their best. And you do that through democracy, through openness, through meritocracy, through innovation. But over time, as these elite families have more and more children, and these children are engaged in rent-seeking behavior, they basically want to steal profits from the corporation. The corporation runs into trouble, and the managers are forced to coerce the people, which leads to greater conflict. And eventually, over time, the collapse happens when society breaks up into different factions, which leads to civil war or revolution or war. Okay? So that's a model we're working with. All right, any questions? Are you guys clear about this? Yeah?
What if they just don't have that much children?
Excuse me, what's the question?
What if the elite families don't have that much children? Will this model still works?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay. So what if families don't have that many children? Okay, that's a really interesting question. And the answer is these families, first and foremost, want to have as many children as possible. Right? Because how do you pass on your power? So maybe maybe the middle class don't want to have that many children, but the elite will have a lot of children because they need to be able to pass on their power and privilege to their children. In fact, the elite is first and foremost concerned with passing on their privilege to the next generation. Okay? And that's why these elite families expand so fast. And also, who wants to marry into elite families? Who wants to marry into them? Everyone. All right? And they have to marry into other families in order to maintain their power. Okay? So having children in a marriage is a way for the elite to maintain their power. All right, so let's look at a very specific example of rent-seeking behavior. Mycenaean Greece. All right, Mycenaean Greece. So Mycenaean Greece, and you may remember this from last class. It was a long time ago, but last class we talked about the Yamnaya, right? The Yamnaya, right? They conquered Europe. So the Mycenaean Greece and the Hittites are direct descendants of the Yamnaya. And as you remember, this is a warrior culture. Okay? So these societies are warrior societies, meaning like the warriors are in charge. And they have a system called a palace economy. Right? A palace economy. A palace economy is basically the palace is at the center of society. And everyone brings their wealth to the palace to be redistributed to everyone else. Okay, so the idea here is we're all farmers, right? And maybe you have 100 bushels of wheat, maybe 20 bushels of corn, okay? Everyone brings everything to the palace, and then the king redistributes everything to you, okay? But obviously, he takes a cut. Understand? So this is called rent-seeking behavior, where you're basically paying taxes, okay? Does it make sense? Okay? Now, this is fine when things are good, okay? But if the weather becomes bad, the system starts to collapse. Why? If the weather is bad, things start to become chaotic. Why? Okay, the reason why is the elite still want their cut. You understand? It's not like, oh, this year the weather's bad, so let's just suffer together, okay? Let's make sacrifices together. No, it's like, no, we don't care if the weather's bad. You still have to pay our cut, okay? You still have to pay your taxes. Right? And that creates strain on the people. And the people get very angry. Okay? So we have evidence that during the Bronze Age, there was an internal revolt in Mycenaean Greece. And the reason why is we can dig up Mycenaean Greece, okay, the palace, and what we see is the palace is burnt down. But the surrounding houses are fine. Okay, does that make sense? We also have written records from Mycenaean Greece that show how the palace economy worked, okay? We can also dig up the graves of the kings and show that over time, they became wealthier and wealthier. Because when they were buried, the things they were buried with were very expensive. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. So that's Mycenaean Greece. Any questions so far? Okay, it's clear about this idea. Okay? So what a lot of scholars believe is that the Bronze Age collapse was a unique event in European history. And what I'm trying to show you is it was not a unique event. It was not a revolution. It's just part of the natural cycle of history. Because when you have an elite who engage in rent-seeking behavior, eventually this society will collapse. Because you have too many elite who want their cut. Okay? And when we look at other societies, you would discover this pattern repeats itself. Right? So this is Peter Turchin, his theory of elite overproduction. Okay, all right, so, let me clarify about Mycenaean Greece, okay? All right, the problem is that you have too many rich people who want to charge rent, right? And that creates pressure on society. And this instability means that your society is no longer resilient, okay? Resilient. And the idea of resilience is that it survives disasters, right? So think of a tower that's about to collapse, okay? It will not collapse on its own. Something must hit it for it to collapse. But this one thing could be anything, okay? It could be the people get angry and they riot. It could be the weather turns bad, okay? It could be there's an earthquake. It could be there's an invasion. Does that make sense? So these different societies, okay, Mycenaean Greece, Hittites, the Canaanites, they collapsed for different reasons. But the fundamental reason is because their societies were unstable. The reason why they were unstable is you had too many elite people trying to charge rent on everyone else. Does that make sense? Okay. Any more questions? That's a good question. Thank you. Can you avoid this cycle in today's society? Okay. That's a great question. And the answer is no. Okay. It is impossible to build a society that is stable over a long period of time. In fact, you can make the argument that it is good for societies to rise and fall. Okay? It's the same thing as, it's really the same question as, is it possible for us to live forever? Is it possible for us to live forever? And then the question then is, why would we want to live forever? You understand? Innovation happens when we die. Okay? So, what's amazing about the Bronze Age collapse is, because the Bronze Age collapsed, Mycenaean Greece changed into a new society that gave us Greek civilization, which then gave us Western civilization. Okay? So in other words, if Mycenaean Greece did not collapse, we would not have today. Also, because Canaan collapsed, a new society came into being called the Israelites, okay? Israel. And Israel gave us what? Do you guys know? The Bible. Right? And guess what, guys? The Greeks and the Bible are the two foundations of Western civilization. So we would not have Western civilization if these societies did not collapse and new societies could come into being. All right? So you can make the argument that innovation, progress, is driven by death and collapse. All right? You understand? And if we did not die, if we did not die, if society did not collapse, there'd be no progress. Okay? Does it make sense? But that's a good question, okay? And people have been debating this question for a long time, but I think the answer is, it is impossible to build a society that lives forever, even though people have tried. And also, we shouldn't even try, okay? Because collapse is good. Also think of a forest fire. Have you guys studied forest fires in school, in science class? Forest fires. Forest fires, guys. Each time there's a forest fire, okay, the forest burns down, that's good because it allows the forest to regenerate and become stronger. Right? What happens if you don't have a forest fire? Do you guys know? Okay, the resilience goes down. Okay? And also, the ecosystem is less vibrant. There are less animals. The trees are less strong. Okay, do you understand? So that's why it's important to burn down the forest now and then. If you don't burn down the forest, and then it's less resilient. So if there's a big forest fire, it will just spread and destroy the entire forest, okay? Does that make sense? So it's good for societies to constantly change over time. Okay, that's a great question, okay? All right, so before we were talking about egalitarian societies, right? How they were at most 10,000 people. And they did have an elite, okay? They had an elite. They had people in charge, but this elite didn't own the property. There was no private property, okay? So it's egalitarian. And so these societies were pretty stable, okay? And the reason why is usually it was the woman in charge, and the woman were good at controlling population, okay? Because as a woman, you have control over your body. So you could choose not to have children or have less children. And it was very peaceful, right? People didn't really fight because there was nothing to fight over. Everything was owned by everyone else. Okay? The problem with egalitarian societies are these three things, okay? They're less organized, meaning like they are less willing or less able to create public projects. Okay? They have less wealth, and therefore they have less scale, okay? You can have at most 10,000 people. Which means what? Which means like eventually they will be conquered. Okay? Does that make sense? Because if you are one of these societies, okay, you're an empire, you must constantly expand in order to please the elite, basically, okay? Either you expand or you fight a civil war. And so you take over egalitarian societies and you make them into your society, okay? Do you understand? So, for most of human history, we're egalitarian, but that's because we didn't have that many people. Right? But over time, as population increases, then you are less egalitarian. You become more unequal. If you stay egalitarian, you will eventually be conquered by a not an egalitarian society. Does that make sense? Right? All right. But that's a great question. You're exactly right, okay? For most of human history, we're egalitarian. But once we start to develop elite societies, okay, kingdoms, then they could easily conquer egalitarian societies. All right. How did the empire fall? Okay. Well, the standard explanation is that eventually Rome became too corrupt. And this is the explanation provided by most Roman historians, as well as the famous British historian Edward Gibbon in his most famous work, History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Okay, it's corruption. It's because the Romans became more like the Greeks or like the Persians. They started to appreciate the luxury, decadence, and corruption of empire more. Okay, and the explanation is that over time, you had all these Germanic invaders from the steppes. Remember, the steppes is where the Yannai people come from. These Visigoths are being pushed out by the Huns. Okay, so remember, the steppes is really this massive, competitive whirlpool hurricane that makes people more and more aggressive. And more aggressive tribes will push out less aggressive tribes. And these people are forced to go into Europe. And over time, the Romans are trying to absorb them into their empire by making them soldiers or by giving them land, okay? But over time, this pure population will force the empire to collapse. Okay? And that's the central explanation. I want to make a different argument. My argument is this. It really has to do, again, with the idea of citizenship and identity. Throughout most of its history, Imperial Rome has been struggling with this identity issue. And then at some point, an emperor came along and said, screw this, we no longer want to be a republic, we want to be an empire. Okay? And the way he resolved this issue is, in 212, the emperor Caracalla issued the Edict of Caracalla, which made everyone in Roman Empire a citizen. So he basically destroyed the idea of citizenship. If everyone can be a citizen, citizenship means nothing. Before, you have to fight for Rome, you have to die for Rome in order to become a citizen. You have to believe in the customs, the history, the tradition of Rome to become a citizen. You have to fight for it. It was valuable. In fact, it was the most valuable thing in the world for people. But now everyone got it, so it's absolutely worthless. Okay? And because everyone was now a Roman citizen, there was now no more Roman identity. It was now a clean slate. The emperors were now no longer bounded by tradition or history, by institutions like the Senate. And so now they could build the imperial bureaucracy. And this imperial bureaucracy will replace the republic. And the major change is in 330, the Emperor Constantine will move the capital from Rome to a place called Byzantium, which will become the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire. Okay, we'll talk about this next class. But this is something that was unthinkable. How could you move the heart and center and soul of the empire from Rome to somewhere else? It was unthinkable. If to be Roman was meant to die for Rome, but now the capital was somewhere else. Okay? And so this marks basically the end of Rome as a cultural identity, as a cultural beacon. Okay? This marked really the death of the history of Rome. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay? Now, historians argue about this. And historians argue when the Roman Empire fell. All right? But the consensus is 476, when a German warlord deposed the last emperor named Romulus Augustus. Okay? But I disagree. I believe that it really happened in 212 when Rome announced everyone could be a citizen. Okay, all right. Let me clarify. Okay, Tacitus was a senator. Okay, the senator was always in conflict with the emperor. Okay, the Senate. Okay, sorry. Let me clarify about the Senate. The Senate was basically the Roman aristocracy. It was where the ruling families of Rome sat, and they were supposed to be in charge of the empire. And the emperor was basically like the CEO. Okay. He was basically in charge of managing the empire, but it was the Senate that was supposed to make the decisions. In reality, it was the emperor who was in charge because the emperor controlled the army and he controlled the Praetorian Guard, which was secret police. So he could kill senators who disobeyed him. Okay? And this was always a very complex relationship. So when Tacitus, again, who is a senator, who comes from one of the elite families of Rome, when he's writing about the history of the Roman Empire from the time of Augustus to Nero, he's trying to paint them in a very bad light, okay? Because he's trying to tell us emperors are bad. What's good is the Senate. Okay? And that's why he's producing this speech. Because if you're a Roman citizen and you read this speech by Marcus Tyrannus, you are appalled. You're disgusted. We're Romans. We hate kings. We do not obey. We fight. We do not surrender. Okay, so this speech goes against the very heart and soul of what it means to be Roman. And that's why Tacitus is writing this and saying, you see what empire does to the Roman character. It corrupts us. It destroys us. It weakens us. And therefore we must resist the emperor and protect the Senate. Okay, does that make sense, guys? Okay, so thanks for that. Okay, so I apologize because I'm running through a lot of history in a short amount of time, so I'm missing a lot of important details. What's really important for you to understand is, in a republic, the Senate is in charge. Okay, meaning the ruling houses, the aristocracy is in charge. But in an empire, the emperor is in charge. But Rome never resolved this issue. Who should be in charge, the Senate or the emperor? And it changes over time. Okay, sometimes the Senate's in charge. Sometimes the emperor's in charge. But they all believe they're protecting the republic. And this creates cognitive dissonance. Okay? And it creates a lot of confusion. And then in 212, the emperor said, screw this, let's just be an empire. I don't want the Senate anymore. Okay? And this And this begins a process of creating the Byzantium Empire, which does not have the idea of a Roman character. Today we do death by gerontocracy. Gerontocracy just means rule by old people. Last class, we discussed the decline of Western society and civilization and why it's happening. We discussed the theories. Today, we will look at what the reality on the ground is, what the actual trends are, what are the concrete examples of decline in the Western world. Okay? Let's look at the signs of Western decline. You've got higher property prices. This happened throughout the Western world. Inflation and lower quality of life. Higher stock market valuations, which means greater inequality. Less real economic growth, less and less people are doing real jobs. Euthanasia for the poor, just killing off the poor people. Mass immigration, population replacement. Lower birth rate, greater public and private debt, bureaucratic gaslighting. When the government no longer acknowledges problems, it just lies to you directly. And privatization, asset stripping, okay? So all this is happening in the Western world. The question now is, why would this happen? And there are different theories, okay? And we'll go over some of the major theories. There's lots and lots of theories. We'll go over the major ones. And there's going to be overlap between these theories. And some of these theories make a lot of sense, okay? So one major theory is the idea of neoliberalism. The idea of neoliberalism is the belief that all that matters in society, all that matters in life is economic growth. If your society can generate more economic growth, all the problems will be solved, okay? So if your economy runs really fast, then everyone will be happy. That's the idea of neoliberalism. Then you have techno-feudalism, which is the idea that some big corporations, usually these tech companies, they want to control the world. And so they want to turn everyone into slaves. And if you don't have a house, if you don't have your own property, then you can be controlled by these companies, okay? Techno-feudalism. World government, where the United Nations has this conspiracy to control the entire world, to destroy national sovereignty and create a world unified government, okay? Population replacement theory. And the idea here is that the problem for governments in the Western world is that white people are opinionated. They believe in democracy. They believe in freedom. And they're hard to control. So let's replace the white people with Chinese and Indians and Filipinos, because Asian people are more obedient, right? That's the idea. And again, these are just theories. I'm not saying they're right or wrong, okay? And we'll go into these theories later on the semester. Now, the last reason is bureaucratic incompetence. Just the government is just stupid, okay? Now, there's may overlap among these theories, and there's some validity to all these theories. But what I want to show you is that there's actually a much better way to analyze this. Whenever you have a problem, you always ask yourself, who benefits? Who is benefiting from this, right? So when we're talking about housing prices, well, clearly property owners are benefiting from this, right? So if we took all the groups, okay, and there's like millions of different groups in society, and we just analyze who benefits from all these trends that we discuss, the answer you would get is rich pensioners. These are the people who benefit the most from these trends. And therefore, we can suspect that they're the ones behind these trends, okay? So let's go over them. Property prices make sense, right? Because they're old, they have houses. They probably have 2 or 3 houses. So they want to see the property prices go up. Higher stock market valuations make sense because they own the most stocks. Euthanasia for the poor makes sense because they want good medical care. If poor people are standing in line, that's a problem for them, right? So just kill the poor people and they'll have better access to healthcare. Right? If that frees up the healthcare system. Mass immigration means cheap labor. If they're old, they're 70 or 80 years old, they need gardeners, they need cooks, they need nurses. Right? Immigrants. Do you guys want to be gardeners and cooks and laborers? You don't want to be, so we have to bring in immigrants. And everything else, okay? Inflation, economic growth, lower birth rate, gaslighting, it doesn't really affect them. Does that make sense? So all these trends, some of them are really good for these pensioners, and the rest doesn't really affect the pensioners. And that's why we can assume for analysis, that's the rich pensioners who are most responsible for what's going on. Does it make sense to you guys? All right. So how can we understand this? Well, the problem that we're facing is never in human history have we had so many old rich people before. Okay? And you can see these trends where in the year 1900, people who are 75 and older were just a small fraction of society. But you can see how fast they're growing. Okay? Over 60 years old, really growing really fast. There's a problem because if they keep on living, they accumulate more and more resources, which creates a lot more inequality. Now, I'm not saying that all old people are rich. In fact, that's not the case. If you just look at statistics, you will find that wealth is pretty much evenly distributed among demographics, okay? So there are young people with a lot of money, but there are more old people with money. Okay? So there are lots and lots of old people, the purple are old people who are poor. I'm not saying that old people are the problem, I'm saying that old rich people are the problem. They're a problem because they want their pensions. The pension systems in all societies made assumptions about old people. The major assumption that they made is that old people would die, right? So, for example, in Canada, when they first created the pension system, the retirement age was 65, and they expected people to die when they're 72. So you have 5 to 7 years of a good pension, okay? Guess what, guys? They're not dying, right? And that creates a huge problem with your pension plan. And you can see how these liabilities are going up over time. These are teachers, and as you can see, the liabilities are going way up. Why is this happening? It's happening because of something called assumption changes, okay? So 2 assumptions are being made. First is that old people will die. Well, they're not dying. The other assumption is that if you put money in the stock market, it will year by year improve, right? The problem is that there's volatility in the stock market. It goes up and goes down. And the smart people make money off dumb people. Guess what, guys? Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question. In finance, where do the dumbest people work? You guys know? In finance, the dumbest people work where? They work in pension funds. Why? Because it's a boring job. You just sit there and do nothing all day. So these pension funds are constantly getting ripped off from investment banks where the smart people are. Okay, so if you look at all investment vehicles, pension funds have lost the most money. And this has created huge issues within government pension funds throughout the world. Okay, so as you can see, there's volatility in returns in the pension fund. Okay, when you put the money in, the returns will differ year by year, and that screws up your model. If you're a young person, do not put money in the pension fund. Why? Because the value of the pension fund is going drastically down. When you grow up, when you mature, and you retire, guess what, guys? There's no money in the pension fund for you because all that money is gone. Why? Because there are too many retirees and not enough workers. All right, so back in the year 2001, you had a problem. You had 7.6 retirees for every 12.7 workers. The ideal is 1 to 3. So 1 pensioner, 3 workers. That's a healthy pension system. Now you have more pensioners, okay, than you have workers. This is a huge problem. These pensions will all go bankrupt in 5 to 10 years' time. At the same time, as I said, old people are not dying. In fact, old people are coming to dominate society. This is America. You can see how people who are 85 and older, whoa, look at this. Look at this. The aging crisis in America is huge. But it's not just America, it's everywhere, right? So by the year 2040, you have 65 million people in America who are over 65. You have 15 million Americans who are 85. And guess what? These 15 Americans, most of them are the ones who control America. So they dictate policy. And again, this is happening throughout the world, okay? It's particularly stark in Japan and Germany. But this is happening throughout the world. And this leads us to the idea of gerontocracy. Okay? This is Joe Biden, President of the United States, and this is Mitch McConnell, who is head of the Senate. They're both retired now. Okay? But they're both in their 80s, and they were the two most powerful men in America. He can't walk straight. Okay? Whenever he walks, he trips. This guy is even worse because, look at this. The guy's brain dead. The guy is literally brain dead in public. Okay? He'll be like, and like, no matter what you do, he's like, this is brain dead, okay? This is a brain freeze. The guy should not be one of the most powerful men in America, but he is. That's the world we live in, because he will not give up power. This is Dianne Feinstein. She died in office. She was 90 years old. She was 90 years old, and she was still working, and she died in her office. And she was a senator in the United States. These people are literally fighting for life. Okay? They refuse to give up power. They only give up power if they die. This is the US Senate, again, the most powerful political institution in America. These are people who are above the standard retirement age, which is 62, okay? This guy's 90 years old, and he's still working. 90 years old, and he's still working in the Senate. And he doesn't want to retire. Chuck Grassley. What does it mean to have a world run by old people? Now, maybe in school, maybe at home you've been taught that old people are wise. They're tolerant. They're generous. They're benevolent. No, guys. No. The difference between these three generations, young, mature, and elderly, are pretty stark. If you're young, you're rebellious. You want to change the system. If you're mature, you want things to move slowly, okay? But if you're elderly, you're reactionary, meaning you don't want anything to change. Okay? If you change anything, they get upset and slap you. That's reactionary. Young people are creative. Mature people want growth. But elderly people care first and foremost about safety. Young people are open-minded. Mature people want consensus, meaning they want everyone to get along. But elderly people are stubborn. They want things their way. So we are now living in a gerontocracy which is ruled by elderly people, okay? So we're going to live in a reactionary, stubborn system only concerned about the safety of these people. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that the world will go into lockdown. When there's a virus, guess what? We're all going to have to shut down because old people are afraid of catching germs. It will also lead to a police state. Okay? Now, police state does not mean that there'll be terrible police coming to beat us up. In fact, if in real life, most police that you meet are really, really nice people. But you have no individual freedom. Okay, so let me give you an example of this. So in Canada, a Chinese moved to Canada, and she bought a house, and her son is very naughty. And her son was so naughty that she wants to slap him. But she knows that in Canada, you can't really slap children, even in private, right? So she goes online and asks everyone, can I slap my child? And everyone's like, you can't do that because if you do that, your neighbors will report you to the police. But what you can do is report your child to the police. Tell the police your child is naughty and they'll come and help you discipline your child. In fact, you can get the police to come every single week. They like that. This is what we call a police state, okay? Intrusive government interference into your personal lives. Oh, and lots of surveillance, okay? Wherever you move, you'll be tracked. Whatever call you make, you'll be tracked. In 2003, Britain passed something called the Online Safety Act. And the idea is, if you say anything bad online, you can get arrested. Okay, so the freedom of expression is being limited. This passed in 2023 in Britain, but I assume it will pass everywhere in the Western world. Digital currency. The idea of digital currency is the idea of financial repression. So they're trying to eliminate cash because with cash, there's freedom. You can do whatever you want with cash. You can buy whatever you want. for how much you want with cash. But with digital currency, all your transactions will be limited and monitored. Okay? So in the future, you will not be able to buy video games because that's bad for you. Oh, microchip implants, guys. Right? Isn't that great? Before you had cell phones, then you had facial recognition, and in the future you have implants, microchip implants. Immigrants, lots and lots of immigrants, because rich pensioners need help. They need nurses, they need laborers, they need gardeners, they need people to mow their lawn. So you have massive immigration coming into the country. Oh, but good news, okay? It'll be easier for you to study in America from now on, right? Today, Trump announced he wants 600,000 Chinese students to go to the United States, right? Before you guys were worried about not getting your visas and getting denied at the border, don't worry, guys. They want you to go to the United States because you guys are the best labor, okay? You're cheap, you're obedient, and you're studious, and you're young. Okay? So this is the plan, to let in more Chinese students into America so you guys can take care of elderly people. Isn't that great? Good news, right? Oh, lots and lots of prisons, guys. Okay? Because elderly people are afraid of criminals. And also, prisoners are free labor. Isn't that great? Oh, and one more thing. War after war after war. All right? This is what it means by death by gerontocracy. This is what it means to live in a world governed by elderly people. Elderly people are perfectly happy to send young people to die for their glory. All right? Okay. Pretty depressing, but don't worry. Things will get even more depressing as we go along. All right? All right. Good. Any questions? Are you guys clear? Any questions? Yeah.
Like, for like the above that you said that elders controls the society and wants like they exploit young people. But is there a way that young people could like overthrow or having method to solve this?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So what can young people do about this? And the answer is nothing, okay? And the reason why, and this is really, really important, is that young people are biologically ingrained to respect the elders, right? This is true throughout nature. Even young animals will respect their elders. So, do you want to go kill your grandparents? Probably not. Okay, so there's nothing anyone can do about this. This is just the unfortunate state of affairs. Okay? Old people are people we are biologically trained or wired to respect and obey. And that's why they can send us to wars and we'll go fight wars. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Yeah.
So what happened after the rich pension elders dead? Like, what about their money?
Okay. All right. That's a good question, okay? So as you can see from these charts, eventually there'll be a pension crisis where there are too many pensioners, enough money. Well, guess what? The old people are the major political force in society. They dictate policy. So what will happen is that money will be diverted from elsewhere into pensions. Where? Schooling, right? Public schooling, healthcare, everywhere basically, okay? But the pensioners will want that money. And pensioners, first of all, they're powerful, but they also have a lot of free time on their hands to make trouble for everyone. And also because we respect the elderly, right? Okay. Do you want to deny healthcare and pension to your grandparents? So everyone will be for this. There's nothing we can do about it. All right? Good question.
But like humans' life have a limit. Like, what will happen after like they all died because they are just although they are elders and those rich pensions, they are still generations of human.
That's a really great point, okay? So the idea is that what happens when they die off? Well, they're not dying off, okay? They were supposed to die at 72. Now they're living to like 100. Modern medicine is incredible. I have a friend who's like 90 years old. She's like literally brain dead. Okay, she's like literally brain dead. She's 90 years old, but she's filthy rich. And she has access to the best healthcare. So I asked my friend, who's a doctor, like, if you're filthy rich and you want to keep on living, how long could modern medicine keep you going on, even though you're a vegetable? And he said to me, 20 years. 20 years. 20 years of being a vegetable, but she has money, so, and she wants to keep on living, then she can do that. Okay? And that was not available before because of scarcity, right? Because of lack of technology. But nowadays, because of abundance, because of technology, old people can live as long as they want to. And also, what this chart tells us is that when the green goes away, the red becomes the green, right? So you'll always have a society where the elderly are in control. Okay? Does that make sense? Unless, of course, there were maybe, I don't know, a catastrophe, a nuclear holocaust, who knows, okay? But given the way things are, the trend is that old people can control society for a long time. Because if there's a war, it's not old people who die, it's young people who die. Okay? 2004, okay? George W. Bush versus John Kerry. Guess what, guys? John Kerry's the Democratic nominee, George Bush is Republican nominee, right? They're both skull and bones. They're both Yale skull and bones. Okay? So it's a rigged game. Or Barack Obama, okay? Barack Obama, Columbia, went to Harvard Law School, but he promised hope and change. He told people in 2008 that the game is rigged against them, that he would be their champion, that he would make America more fair, okay? And he won. Why? Because, so this is his book, Dreams My Father. It was a New York Times bestseller. It basically launched his political career. He won because in 2008, the US economy collapsed. Why? Because the US banks, the US political system was controlled by Ivy League graduates, by just people who were friends with each other. And so they cheated. They became corrupt. Okay? They basically destroyed the American economy. And people protested against all of this. And Barack Obama promised that he would come in and do something about it. Okay? Well, he did do something about it. Right? So his economic team, he appointed quite a few individuals. These are the two most famous. Larry Summers, who was a Harvard graduate as well as a president of Harvard. And he was Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton, and he was the guy who created the mess in the first place. And then Tim Geithner, who was a Dartmouth graduate, and he was the Treasury Secretary, okay? So these are friends of Wall Street who came in to save Wall Street. So a lot of critics say, it's Wall Street who created this mess, who destroyed the American economy. They should be punished, or at least they should feel some pain. If you just let them go and help them out and save them, then you create a problem called moral hazard. The idea of moral hazard is if you don't have any consequences for your mistake, you will do it again. Okay? And then Larry Summers said, no, you guys are seeing it incorrectly. We have to save the American economy. The goal is not to save the banks and my friends. The goal is to save the American people and the American economy, and that's why we're bailing out the banks by giving them free money. Okay? And then the critics were like, well, how about all these American homeowners who've lost their homes? Shouldn't we help them as well? And do you know what Larry Summers said? Moral hazard, guys. Do you understand? Moral hazard? If we help out these ordinary Americans, they won't learn anything. Okay? So, as you can see, people were angry. The banks got saved, the people got screwed over. And guess what, guys? Because of this, who did we get? This guy. Okay? This is why he won. There were millions of Americans who voted for Barack Obama because he promised hope and change. And then they voted for Donald Trump because he promised to destroy the system. Okay? That's why we have Donald Trump. Now, funny story about Donald Trump and Barack Obama. So Barack Obama and Donald Trump were always adversaries. In fact, Donald Trump led a movement which accused Barack Obama of not being born in America. He's born in America, but Donald Trump is saying, no, he was actually born in Nigeria. His father is from Nigeria. So Barack Obama made fun of Donald Trump. 2011, there's a big dinner, the White House Correspondents' Dinner, where Barack Obama gets on stage and he makes fun of Donald Trump. Okay? He says, hey, if Donald Trump ever became president, this is what the White House would look like. It'd be a casino. Okay? And this is funny, right? Donald Trump was in the audience that day. And everyone was laughing at him. And that's what motivated Donald Trump to become president of the United States. Okay, so thank Obama for Donald Trump. Without Obama, there would be no Donald Trump. Conclude and summarize why the meritocracy is so great. It creates this extreme inequality in America, okay? So it destroyed the school system because all people care about are their grades now, right? People don't even care about learning anymore. All they want are the grades. In fact, if you get a bad grade, you'll probably complain to the teacher. In which case, the teacher's now afraid to teach you because if the teacher tries to challenge you, make you a better student, you'll just complain, okay? And if you don't succeed, your parents will come and complain, okay? Traumatized children, okay? Okay? If you look at the rate of mental illness in China and America, it's just insane. Death of the American dream and social mobility, you're not gonna be richer than your parents, you're just not. Concentration of wealth, power, and status in the 1%, the richest cities get richer. Political divide between left and right, okay? So you have all these political divisions right now in America. Corruption, so Wall Street just steals and steals and steals, and no one can do anything about it. Destruction of American identity, globalization, immigration, woke ideology, okay? Incompetent and mismanagement. You look at COVID, you look at the fact that America now has $37 trillion in debt. An elite that is soulless, mediocre, and unimaginative, okay? Barack Obama, J.D. Vance, this guy, Johnny Kim, okay? They're just robots. Oh, and Donald Trump, okay? So thank you, American meritocracy, for destroying the world. Okay, so let us summarize what we've learned so far and discuss what is it that allows societies to rise and fall. So we'll look at three phases: the rise, the decline, and the collapse. Okay, so when I mean decline, I don't mean like things are getting worse. I mean things aren't improving, okay? So rise is when things get better, decline is when things are stagnant or getting slightly worse, collapse is when society is about to fall apart, okay? So if you look at these three particular phases of society, there are different characteristics. When a society rises, it is first and foremost open. Open just means that you have opportunities for social mobility in a society. If you're a poor person, you can make money. You can become wealthy. Your talent is appreciated. It's a meritocracy. It's innovative. If you criticize society, people are like, thank you for criticizing us because criticism makes us better people. Okay, there's open debate. Now, what's really interesting is most young societies are open societies, okay? So, for example, in 1950s, America was a democracy, right? China was communist. But, this is really interesting, in the 1950s, they were both open societies. You could criticize leaders. In fact, you were encouraged to criticize leaders. China was as democratic back then as the United States, okay? So it's not about political systems, it's just about what stage you are in social development. So if you're young, you're going to be open, you're going to be democratic, you're going to be meritocratic. You want to learn, so you will listen to criticism, okay? That's the first great characteristic of a society on the rise. It's openness. But when you reach a decline phase, guess what? Society becomes bureaucratic. Okay? Bureaucratic. Why? Because if we go back to this model, as a company loses more and more money, the managerial class is concerned with maintaining their jobs. So they become bureaucrats. Okay? They have to prove their worth. So they create a lot of paperwork. They make everyone follow the rules. Society becomes more and more bureaucratic. Then in the collapse phase, society becomes authoritarian. Okay? Before decline is all following the rules. Now it's just rule by force. Okay? But there's another way of saying this. In the rise phase, what matters is the consent. Okay? So these three groups, the elite, the middle class, and the people, they're all working together to improve society. There's consent. But when you hit the decline phase, now there's deception. And then when you hit the collapse phase, it's coercion. So let me give you an example. Let's just say we are in the rise phase, right? Well, we want to go to lunch. So we discuss where we go to lunch. I want to go to McDonald's, but you guys want to go to Pizza Hut or KFC. We have debate, and then eventually we vote, and whoever wants to go, like the majority wins, okay? That's the consent phase. When we hit the decline phase, deception, I'm the teacher, so I say to you, hey guys, let's go to McDonald's because Wang Fei will be there, or Jack Ma will be there, or it's free hamburgers today, okay? I'm lying to you to get what I want. And then in the collapse phase is, I say to you, I'm the teacher and I will beat you up if you don't listen to me. Okay? So in the rise phase, what matters first and foremost is unity of the people. We're all working together. There's empathy. There's concern for other people. I want to be your friend. We need to work together to make society better. Okay? But in the decline phase, it's really about stability. It's about making sure that society maintains the status quo. Okay? When we reach the collapse phase, it is survival. Screw you. I want to live, and if I have to kill you, I'll kill you. All right? So this is a map that shows us what happens when society rises, declines, and collapses. Now, what's really interesting about this is the timing, okay? So if you actually look at societies, the timeline, it goes like this, okay? There's a steep rise, the decline is slow, and the collapse is sudden. So people think, oh, decline, things get worse, but we follow this trend, we'll still be here, but actually the collapse happens really fast. Why? The reason why is this system cannot survive external shocks. So external shocks is a perfect storm of crises. So another way of saying this is, maybe society prepares for, okay, if there's a plague, we'll do this. If there's a climate crisis, we'll do this. If there's a drought, we'll do this. If there's a war, we'll do this, okay? But what society is not prepared for is these things happening all at once. The plague, the drought, war, revolution, they all happen at once. It's a perfect storm. And that's what leads to the collapse, because society is not prepared for this. Okay? And why is society not prepared for this? Because when you hit the authoritarian phase, you're not allowed to criticize the system anymore. The problem are those who speak out. The problem is those who point out the problems of society. In the rise phase, those who criticize society are the heroes. They are appreciated. They are rewarded. In the collapse phase, those who speak out are the enemies of society. And therefore, society cannot be prepared for any external threats, which leads to its collapse. Any questions? Okay, so this is the analytical model that we're working with. And again, we're going to apply it to the present, and then we're going to apply it to the past. Okay? So with this analytical model, what we can do is make certain predictions about the future. So I will make these predictions. And I expect these things to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. 5 to 10 years. Or 10 to 20 years. Okay, I don't know the time frame, okay? But I expect these things to happen. Okay, the first thing that's going to happen in the Western world is decline of democracy and freedom. So remember, in the rise phase, society is democratic and open and meritocratic. But as you move on, it becomes more bureaucratic and ultimately authoritarian, okay? So we will see the United States, Europe become much more authoritarian. You will see a collapse of democracy and freedom in these nations. And already we're seeing this happen in the United States, where Trump is using more and more military to resolve issues. Right? So that's the first prediction. And this is going to happen throughout the Western world. Second thing is economic collapse. So as people have less and less right to speak up, they feel less invested in the system, they're less willing to work. Therefore, you have economic collapse. People don't believe in the system anymore. Okay, the system is in crisis. This will lead to immigration. The government is like, you know what, if the people don't want to work, screw them, let's bring in immigrants to do the work. Okay, let's replace our population. But the people are not going to sit back and take it, right? This leads to civil war. People are not killing each other on the streets. And the government is like, you know what? If we continue to let them fight, eventually they're going to come after us. So what we'll do is send them off to like these stupid, pointless wars overseas. Okay? So now you have stupid wars. Stupid foreign wars. And these are my 5 predictions for the world for the next 5, 10, 20 years. Okay? Europe and America will see less freedom and democracy. There'll be economic collapse, increased immigration, civil conflict, and then ultimately stupid foreign wars. And I'm not saying this happens in a sequence. I'm saying you'll see all 5 things. Okay? But they may happen in different order. Any questions? Was this clear to you guys? Yeah, thank you.
Is there any chance that the government tries to use a war to distract the people? Like they're trying to hide all of the collapse of the society and their country?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is, that's what wars are for. It's to distract the people, right? Because if you don't distract the people, they'll come and revolt against you. So you either send them to a war, or you could have a French Revolution on your hands. Right? That's your option. War or revolution? I think war's the better option. That's why we're heading into a world at war.
Why not revolution?
Okay, no, I'm saying like, if you don't send the people to war, they will revolt against you. So you send them off to war to distract them, to get rid of them.
But what if they're right? They don't care.
Okay, there's no right and wrong here, okay, guys? Okay, all right. Okay, I apologize, okay? But one thing that you will learn in my class is there's no right and wrong. There's no logic, okay? It's not like, it is immoral to send people to war. I know that, thank you very much. Okay, but I'm trying to explain to you how power works. That's the theme of this course. I'm trying to explain to you how people in power think and behave. All right? And again, I keep on saying this. I don't know if I'm right. But what I'm doing is I'm presenting a theory, a model that we can use to make predictions. And if these predictions work out, if it actually happens, then our model, there's some accuracy to our model, okay? We'll have to refine our model, but there's some accuracy to it. But hey, if tomorrow Trump, Putin, Xi all get together and says, let's be best friends, then I'm wrong, right? Okay? So that's what we're trying to do in this class. We're not trying to argue what is right, what is wrong, what is just. Because quite honestly, it doesn't matter, right? Morality doesn't matter here. It's about power. We're trying to understand how the world works. And if we do that, then maybe we can work together and build a more just world. But first we need to figure out how the world really, really works. Okay? Any more questions? Okay, great guys. So we will continue this story next class. I'll see you guys next class.